I'm going to suggest a new way that we might start looking at this coronavirus. I'm going to suggest that we don't just see it as something tragic and negative and a bringer of death and destruction, but that we also see it as an instigator of rebirth and resurrection. And that we ask ourselves, what does it really mean? Does it have a deeper purpose behind it? Is there, if you like, an intelligence behind this curious virus that has wended its way into us human beings, inveigled its way and caused some of us to die and some of our livelihoods to die and turned the world inside out and upside down? I think that there is a deeper meaning. And while certainly no one can say that we wanted this, perhaps at some deeper level that this is exactly what we need in order for us to move to the next step of our human evolution. Because certainly what it is doing is that it's making us ask many new questions. I see it as a ginormous wake-up call, or as a supercharged kick in the pants, because there's something about our reluctance to change, our resistance to change, our preferring to stay with things as being the way they are, even if they don't work very well. And what this virus is doing is that it's making us ask new questions and is a change agent from without. Let's look at the last two crises we had, 9/11 and the 2008 financial crisis. Well, they didn't change anything. They didn't hit us hard enough. It was very soon back to business as usual. But this crisis is very different. A, because it doesn't just touch a few of us, but it touches us all in different ways. For the first time, humanity has been united. We are all in this together. So we're being united. And my friends, I don't think it's ever going to be business as usual. And for this, I really celebrate, because the business as usual is what is killing us. As all the pundits say, if we continue along the way that we've been going, we don't do something about climate change, we don't do something about inequality, we don't do something about hunger, we don't do something about the environmental crisis, we don't do something about the nuclear bomb, that we're bound to end up where we're headed, which is over the cliff. A lot of pundits suggest this. And I think this virus has come to save us from going over the cliff. I think this thing that we call civilization, which Einstein said, yes, civilization would be a nice idea. I think this thing called civilization is coming to an end. And we've got to recognize this. It's way past its sell-by date. Our world does not work for far too many of us. It works for the few at the expense of the many. And William Opels wrote a book called Immoderate Greatness. I'm just going to quote what he said. Frivolity, hedonism, cynicism, pessimism, narcissism, consumerism, materialism, and other negative attributes suffuse the people. Politics is increasingly corrupt, life increasingly unjust. A cabal of insiders accrues wealth and power at the expense of the rest. Mental and physical illness proliferates. The majority live for bread and circuses. We worship celebrities. We throw off moral restraints, we shirk duties and insist on entitlements and so on. You see, it's true. We have to face that we live in a world that does not work for far too many of us. And those of us whom it seems to work, it only does because we live too narrowly and we don't extend our hearts into the suffering of our fellow human beings where the world does not work so well. And I think the real tragedy is that despite our world leaders knowing about all these problems, and they aren't that difficult to solve, actually, if there's a concerted will. Despite our world leaders knowing about these problems, they don't get solved for the simple reason that it's never important enough. Hunger does not really get solved, although sort of lots of good things have been thrown at hunger and impoverishment, and corporations give millions to help. But nothing really gets done because it's not on the top of the list. And now what humanity is seeing for the first time is that we've got to address this problem of the pandemic, because otherwise it will kill us all. And I think that we're coming to realize that we have to deal with the other problems on our planet, otherwise they are in some form or another also going to come to kill us all. I think this movement for Black Lives Matter is really important because it's a real movement for human liberation that I see has much more power than all the movements that we've seen in the last 20 and 30 years. There's a real impetus, and it's worldwide. And we can say that the cause was an American cop sort of leaning on the neck of a black guy and killing him. But I think that the deeper cause was this pandemic. What it's bringing up is both the best of us. I've never been more aware of the kindness and the altruism and the desire to be of service of so many people and so many corporations. There's a real generosity of spirit in the air. But at the same time, it's also bringing up what is worst about us. And for me, actually, the gift of that psychopath in the White House at the moment is that one person in himself embodies everything that is worst about humanity, most selfish, most narrow, most unintelligent. And it also reflects a part of America that needs to heal. America's a wonderful country. There's many wonderful people there. But I lived there for 15 years. It was fantastic. But there are also a lot wrong with America. And Trump, the gift he's giving is that he's helping Americans see this. And you and I can't change unless we see what's wrong with us. And this is what this this pandemic is bringing up. We're in the middle of a human collective dark night of the soul. We're going into the depths of our suffering. Yeah, there's a lot of suffering for a lot of us, but it's bringing us, I think, to our senses because there's a purgation happening. We're doing a lot of releasing. We're coming face to face with our inertia, our resistance to change. The Tibetan master Dwaj Kul, he said this: man has a habit of crisis. They serve to test the purpose, purity, motive, and intent of the soul. Crises foster understanding and compassion, for the pain and inner conflict they engender draws upon the resources of the heart. I'm seeing a lot of heart awakening happen. I've become friendly with the people on my street who before I never knew. We never knew. We lived as strangers next door to each other. And now we all have flower pots on our windowsill. I think that's rather beautiful. We're coming together where all the barriers that were blocking us, class barriers, race barriers, religious barriers, age barriers, sexual activity barriers, that they're all beginning to fall away. And I think that this is fantastic. In my first book, I wrote about awakening the heart of humanity. And so it makes me very happy that this is happening because I think that we are at an important turning point. Some say, and there is reason for this, that things are not going to turn out well, that this virus is being weaponized for geopolitical purposes like China, America, Russia, Brazil, etc. Okay, that may well be. But what I have a sense is that the power of the people has become greater than ever. And the forces of repression and autocracy, I feel, are going to be defeated. People talk about a struggle between the forces of light, that is, those people who want to move forward to a new humanity, to a more holistic world, to a world that works better, and the forces of darkness, those who want to hold on to the status quo, who want to keep the world the way that it is. I think there's been this conflict for some time, but I feel that although it doesn't always look like it, because we don't always know what's happening beneath the surface, beneath what's being reported in the newspapers, which like to just give us the drama, I think the forces of light and of heart and of goodness in the world are beginning to get a strong upper hand. And I'm seeing a whole new spirit of compassion enter the world. I'm a psychotherapist, and I talked to a client of mine sort of last week, and I record my sessions, and so I recorded exactly what he said in one session, and I would just like to read this out. I've seen my income visibly shrink before me, and with it my capacity for outer movement. And yes, at one level, I'm scared about my job. I'm aware of a whole host of new restrictions and deprivations enter my life. I can't do a lot of things that before I was able. I can't afford to buy many of the things that I could easily afford. But at another level, I'm asking myself if I really need all those things and if my consuming and business and busyness has really added to the quality of my life. The answer is I don't think so. The truth is that I've never felt more abundant, more real, more grateful for being alive, and more appreciative of the blessings in my life. I've a roof over my head. I'm privileged to have my health, the love of my family. And I've never been aware of how fortunate I am compared with the hardships of so many of my fellow human beings. That's such an important point. We human beings are too stuck in feeling we don't have enough, in a kind of insufficiency, in a separation consciousness, in a scarcity consciousness. Oh, I'd feel better if my house was bigger, if I got a rise in my job, if I was more socially active, if I rise, if I was able to ascend in my social ascendancy in the world. But actually, we forget to be aware of the tiny little minute things that we're so grateful for. I do a prayer every day. I say, I give thanks for the blessings in my life. And the more I do this prayer, the more I realize there's so many blessings, there's so many little things that I appreciate that I never allowed myself to appreciate. And this is what this pandemic is bringing up for me as well. So what this man, finished by saying, I feel a growing desire to get off my pedestal of self-centeredness and to try to be of greater service to my brother and sister human beings who are less fortunate than me. And I have a sneaking sense if I can achieve this, it'll make me happy. Well, I agree with him. I think that what makes us happy is not really having the bigger car. I know I'm saying the obvious, but one needs to say the obvious. But what makes us happy is having subtler, deeper relationships with our fellow human beings, going out of our way for them in some way, doing some little act of kindness, being generous. Us human beings are not generous enough. We fear that if we give away, we won't have enough. But that's just part of what's wrong with the world. We need to give away more, and then we'll feel more abundant. My friends, I think we need to appreciate the silver lining of this dark cloud. And here's the absolute truth. 3 months ago, I felt upset at the injustices in the world. Just upset. But I was like everyone else. Yeah, they'll get done in their own way. I'm upset about. Now I feel outraged. I feel outraged at poverty. I feel outraged that, for example, in America, that there's thousands of people who are starving in this opulent country. I feel outraged in the way the rich nations deal with immigrants. I feel outraged that out of every pound in England that we pay for tax, about 75 or 80% goes in armaments. And we need to be outraged. We need to allow our hearts to break at the situation in the world, because when our hearts break, then we do something about it. So it's okay, open your heart and let it break, and then you'll find all the love and the goodness and compassion will come out. And you'll find yourself instinctively taking a stance to be on the side of those forces that hold the solution to the problems in the world, as opposed to the problems in the world. Thank you very much. And I send you much love.